until 1963, you didn't have national injunctions. Now they're coming out of our ears. Donald Trump's president, and they're trying to cripple his presidency. We know what they're doing. These are left-wing judges with left-wing litigants cherry-picking these courts and getting the decisions they want. Is that what the court wants? Well, the court might want it, but the rest of us don't. Now, let's get to birthright citizenship. Where's the phrase birthright citizenship in the Constitution? It doesn't exist. Birthright citizenship. You take the 14th Amendment. That's the amendment through which they try to drive it in, whether it's trying to keep Trump off the ballot, whether it's trying to spend endlessly without any kind of caps on the debt, whatever it is. The 13th, 14th Amendments were simple. They said black people have rights too. The Civil War is over. They are free. Their children are free. They have due process rights. They have equal protection rights. They have the right to vote. They are full citizens. That's what those amendments were basically about. Oh, and their children, the children they have now, the children they have in the future, they're citizens too. Now, why did they do that? Because you still had some states that were saying, no, they're not. And so we amended the Constitution that said, oh, yes, they are. And when you amend the Constitution, you need what? 3/4 of the states to sign off. So the overwhelming majority of the states agree. The word immigrant or a foreigner came up once. The 1866 Civil Rights Act. That was passed by the Republicans. It essentially did what the 14th Amendment did, but they had a problem. Andrew Johnson was the president. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. So what did he do? He vetoed it. So they said, you know, we're going to amend the Constitution. We're going to change all this. So the same authors of that Civil Rights Act wrote the 14th Amendment, and it was understood. Jurisdiction thereof, but that didn't mean some foreigner walks into the country, they have a baby, oh, that's a citizen. Nobody believed that. They weren't crazy like we are today. There was no discussion of that. The 1866 act that they passed specifically said no to foreigners. So they just assumed the understanding and the intention and the purpose of the day, that everybody would understand that. And this is why the proponents of birthright citizenship take jurisdiction around that language. They either ignore it or they twist it to mean if somebody puts their foot in the United States and has a baby, that's a citizen, that's a jurisdiction. They were never talking about geographic jurisdiction. The idea that a foreigner could confer upon themselves all the rights and liberties of the United States, including citizenship, simply by coming into the country and having a child would have been the most alien idea they ever had. So they have to twist the text of the Constitution. Now, for 30 years, after that amendment was ratified, what I'm telling you was the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Then came a case in 1898, where all the chuckleheads on CNN and MSNBC, and the leftists on the court, point to the court in a very activist decision. Understandable, because the Chinese were being horribly discriminated against by Congress. That court twisted the language and held what? Essentially, legal immigrants who have children in the United States, those children are American citizens. Did you hear what I said? Legal immigrants. The Supreme Court has never ruled that the children of illegal aliens are citizens of the United States. As a matter of fact, show me a statute where Congress has passed a law that says the children of illegal aliens are citizens of the United States. The Supreme Court's never said it. The Constitution doesn't say it. Congress has never said it. And here we are. Why? Because the bureaucracy decided to treat it that way. And so when I hear Justice Kagan going on and on saying, you brought this case, you want it to be about national injunctions. You brought the wrong case because substantively, you don't have a leg to stand on, says Kagan. So this decision about birthright citizenship really is going to have nothing to do with the Constitution. It's going to have nothing to do with the law. It's going to have nothing to do with our history. It's going to be a political/policy decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. And they're going to say, I pray not, but I think so, that the jurisdiction language either means for everybody who's born here, other than tourists, other than diplomats, I guess they'll have to figure out how that works, but they'll come up with some phony language. They're going to have to do that. Or I suppose they'll also say one way or another, look, this has been the practice in the United States for decades and decades and decades. We're really not in a position to reverse it. All the tumult it would create and so forth and so on. That's probably what they're going to do. I'm sorry to tell you. Let's move on to the other issue that I want to discuss. The treaty clause. Mark, the treaty clause? You know, I'm really tired. The executive branch, whether it was Obama or Carter or anybody else, pushing through negotiations with foreign governments and not presenting them to the Senate. I want you to look at Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. The President shall, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Wow, they must have meant that. Not a simple majority, but 2/3. So I went back and I studied. I looked at it. So there were debates at the Constitutional Convention. Maybe just the president should do it. You know what they said? No. Then they said, well, maybe we should include the Senate and the House in a simple majority. They said, no, that's unmanageable. There'll be the House. You know, there have to be ways to get a treaty. So they said, all right, the Senate and the president. The president proposes the treaty and it has to be ratified. Not by a simple majority, 2/3. Why? Arrangements made with foreign powers have an enormous effect on the people of the United States. And we want the entire body politic involved about the decision-making process. No deals, no side deals, none of that. Open, transparent involvement of the Senate. That's what they said. You're framers of the Constitution. So what did Obama do with the first Iran deal? He fought like hell to get around it. The Republicans fought like hell and said, it's a treaty. You presented to us, it's a treaty. The vast majority, Rand Paul, always sort of an outlier, he demanded, it's a treaty. The warmongers, treaty. The rhinos, treaty. The Reaganites, treaty. All the Republicans. Except a few, like Bob Corker, no longer in the Senate, from Tennessee. So they cut a deal with Obama, sort of a screwy statutory deal, that the Senate would only step in if they disagreed with a decision related to the nuclear deal with Iran, and so forth and so on. I objected strongly. I was on Fox, I objected on radio, I wrote about it, that this is outrageous. When you're dealing with a hostile nation and nuclear weapons, that should be treated as a treaty. Now, there's a lot of gobbledygook on this. We've had presidents that use executive agreements, no question about it. You're commander-in-chief, sometimes you got to go ahead and make a decision and make these agreements. That's understandable. We've had other agreements, climate agreements, so forth and so on. But when the Constitution used to work, and when we had public officials who wanted it to work, this is the process that was used. I can remember during Reagan, there were a couple of attempts to get legislation or treaties passed and the Senate rejected. I can remember when the other side would propose the same thing. Law of the sea was one of them that comes to mind, and it was rejected, mostly by Republicans in the Senate. So we should embrace representative government. We should embrace transparency. We won't always have the presidency. There will be future Obamas and so forth and so on. So what am I saying? I want to urge and encourage the president, whatever this deal is with Iran, to present it to the Senate as a treaty, or at least to present it to the Senate for some kind of a statutory approval and involvement. So elected representatives beyond the executive branch, and we the people can hear the debates, we can see what's taking place, we know all the intricacies of the deal. There's a lot of debates about spinning centrifuges. I talked about it last night. I don't think Iran should have any centrifuges, because any centrifuges means that they'll have the capacity for a nuclear weapon. I don't care how much of existing nuclear material is removed, how many inspectors you have. I'm not worried about us, I'm worried about them. They lie, they cheat, they kill. Why? Because they're terrorists. That's who they are. I know Qatar sort of is a character representative for Iran, which is pretty hilarious, but nonetheless, I don't care what Qatar thinks. It's more important to know what the American people think, what our United States Senate thinks, than what Qatar thinks, Saudi Arabia thinks, or anybody else thinks. So my advice, maybe it'll fall on deaf ears, my advice to the body politic in Washington, D.C., to the ruling establishment in Washington, D.C., we the people, Mr. and Mrs. America, from sea to shining sea, in the Midwest, North and South, East and West, we want to roll in this. The way we get a roll in this is for it to be presented either for statutory approval or really treaty approval. I want you to read Federalist 75 if you have the time by Hamilton. It's a long discussion about the treaty clause. It was a crucially important clause as far as our framers were concerned, foreign entanglements. It's a good idea. It's a good practice to get back to. We're arguing the Constitution when it comes to judges. We're arguing the Constitution when it comes to upholding our immigration laws. We're arguing the Constitution every day. Thank God we have this administration that stands for the Constitution. Here's just another example where I'm arguing for the Constitution.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
Meet Asana, a work management platform that helps companies get more done and save more time. Teams can stay connected while they track updates and visualize timelines. Asana, a smarter way to work. Try it for free today at asana.com.
We begin this Sunday morning with increasing calls to investigate and possibly arrest Jim Comey after the former FBI director posted an image on social media suggesting a call to assassinate President Trump. Comey was interviewed by the Secret Service on Friday and is now facing a string of federal probes after he posted an image of a beach scene with seashells arranged in the numbers 8647, writing this: cool shell formation on my beach walk. The number 86 typically refers to elimination, and President Trump is, of course, the 47th president. After much public outcry on social media, Comey took down the post, claiming he was not aware that 86 refers to eliminating something, and that he opposes violence. There have already been 2 assassination attempts on President Trump's life, which are still under investigation by the FBI. After the incident, new FBI Director Kash Patel told me he is in the middle of an active investigation into this matter. Days earlier, the 2 walked up through Comey's weaponization of the FBI, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, as well as some of the other important cases that they are working on, including drug and human trafficking cells operating in America today, the events of January 6th, and Jeffrey Epstein's death. But the director began by praising his 30,000-plus colleagues at the FBI during this National Police Week.
It's Police Week, Maria, and so it's a really momentous occasion for law enforcement, for the sacrifice they put in for the country. We're definitely going to have to go to events all week, and the most painful part is being with the families of the fallen. But we're here to remind America that there's a consequence to the freedom that they have. And there's good men and women that keep stepping up for that fight. So, it's a big deal that you're here on Police Week.
Thank you. And I saw the honor and ball, and I want to pass that with you. I unfortunately was on Wall Street on 9/11, and my heart goes out to the families who've lost their loved ones.
Yeah, 9/11, I was an agent on 9/11 with the Secret Service, and I just remember, as you probably do, from the media perspective, the chaos. Remember, nothing worked like we thought it was going to work. So the director and I, we've both been deeply inspired, obviously, as everyone in America was, by that tragic, horrible incident. But I know when Cash and I are sitting there in the morning, that is the single motivating factor for us, is keep the homeland safe. That is priority number 1.
And I want to ask you about that. Now, I'll go into some of the specifics, but Director, you've said many times that the FBI has been politicized. So what are your plans to rebuild trust in this fine institution and depoliticize the FBI?
So we have a multi-part process. First of all, our priorities: simple, crush violent crime, defend the home, rigorous organizational accountability, And the fourth, which leads directly to your question, aggressive constitutional oversight with Congress. The way we rebuild trust is we already have the men and women here in the rank and file that signed up to be cops, that signed up to be intel analysts, that signed up to be special support staff, that want to do the work. That's why we're sending them into the field. We can talk about that later. What we need America to know is that this place was politicized. And Congress has rightfully requested the documents from Crossfire Hurricane to January 6th to the Richmond Catholic Memo and so much more. But now finally Americans are reading for themselves the documentation where a very select few leaders in the former FBI decided to politicize it. We don't need me and the deputy telling you it's politicized. We want the American people to read it, and now they are.
And I know I lived with it for you. I watched it with you and Devin Nunes when you were truth tellers on all of this, and you were as well, Dan, throughout the Russia collusion story and the rest.
Look, I can speak to the folks that were in our seats, our predecessors, and they intentionally failed the American public by putting on the biggest DC deception game we've ever seen. They said the FBI was the most storied institution for law enforcement, and it was. And it will be again very soon. But when the likes of Comey and McCain and Strzok and companies came in here with the James Bakers of the world and intentionally lied to a federal court only to rig a presidential election by lying to the American public and using taxpayer dollars, likely illegally, to fund this entire operation, and then withhold exculpatory information from a federal court that I used to appear for to manhunt terrorists, that's what broke the FBI. And then, when they were caught, they lied about it, and you and a few others like Dan and others were brave enough to cover it 6, 7, 8 years ago, and we're still talking about it today because as Congress is working rigorously with us, the Crossfire Hurricane documents are coming fast and hard, and they're being sent there unredacted so we can have full accountability. And that's how you restore what the trust that was lost to the American public when it comes to the FBI.
Yeah, but come on, Director, with all due respect, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've been demanding accountability for many, many years. You mentioned Comey, Strzok, and the press. They've got TV shows. They've got media platforms. They're fine. There's been no accountability.
Well, look, it's a fair criticism, but what I will tell people is we weren't here in the FBI in the last 5 years when we had statute of limitations that were still in play, where we could have investigated criminal conduct. Most of these statute of limitations are 5 years old. And we will investigate criminal conduct where we find a righteous case to do so, and the law and the facts allow us to. But a lot of it we're precluded from. So we'll take the criticism, and it's rightfully so. Could we have done more in the past? Sure, people before us could have. But what we can do now is continue to put out the documents and the information that these people withheld from the American public. I'm just telling you right now, as much as we know about Crossfire Hurricane, he and I just found out more last week. And we're continuing to work with Congress to put those documents out. That's how vindictive and vicious the former leadership structure here was. Not only did they bastardize the FISA process and lie to the American public, they withheld and hid documentation and put it in rooms where people weren't supposed to look. And it's a good thing we're here now to clean it up, and you're about to see a wave of transparency.
What do you mean?